If ever there were a car that made you question reality, it would be the Volga V12 Coupe. You see, on paper, it shouldn't exist. It's the result of a Cold War era Soviet sedan being surgically crafted onto the bones of a high-performance German coupe, with the end product being something so audacious that even the KGB would have needed a strong drink before trying to process it. This car is what happens when Russian stubbornness meets Bavarian precision. A concoction so absurd, so unnecessary, and yet so utterly magnificent that you can't help but love it. It's the Volga GAZ M21, but not as you might know it. In fact, it's barely a Volga at all. Beneath its retro-futuristic bodywork lies the beating heart of a BMW 850 CSI, an old-school Grand Tourer that was the closest thing to a BMW M8 before the world was ready for one. And this is not a resto mod, it's not a tribute, it's a full-scale automotive Frankenstein that somehow manages to work despite being stitched together with parts from two completely different worlds. But to understand why this custom-built lunatic machine is so special, you first need to understand what the Volga M21 was meant to be. When it was introduced in 1956, the Soviet Union wasn't exactly rolling in consumer luxuries. This was a time when a car was less of a personal indulgence and more of a government-assigned privilege. If you were lucky enough to own a Volga, chances are you were somebody important, or at the very least, knew somebody important. Inspired by American land yachts like the Chevrolet Bel Air and the Plymouth Savoy, the M21 had all the visual drama of a 1950s cruiser, but was built to survive the kind of roads that made Siberia look welcoming. It had massive ground clearance, suspension tough enough to endure the apocalypse, and an engine that prioritized reliability over speed. It was a tank in a suit, driven by high-ranking officials, chauffeurs, and occasionally undercover agents who needed a car that wouldn't explode on impact. But speed, no chance. The original Volga had a 2.5-liter four-cylinder engine, producing around 75 horsepower, which is about as much as a small 1-liter Eggnobox makes today. So when a group of Russian mad scientists decided to turn this plodding relic into a rear-wheel drive V12-powered Grand Tourer, it was clear that subtlety had left the conversation entirely. Now the idea for this one-of-a-kind Volga mutation came in the year 2000, courtesy of a Moscow-based tuning house called A-Level. And instead of doing the sensible thing, perhaps dropping in a more powerful Soviet-era engine or modernizing the interior, they went completely off the rails. Step 1. Throw away everything Soviet that wasn't bolted down. The original frame, gone. The suspension, useless. The drivetrain, well, instead of the original, they hacked apart a BMW 850 CSI, one of the most underrated Bavarian Bruisers of the 1990s. This wasn't just any 8 series either. This was the M-tuned E31 850 CSI, powered by the legendary 5.6-liter S70 B56 V12, an engine that was so good that McLaren borrowed a version of it for their F1 hypercar. With 375 horsepower and 406 pound-feet of torque, the new Volga was now roughly 300 horsepower more powerful than the original, which is a bit like upgrading from a bicycle to a superbike. Transmission duties were handled by a proper 6-speed manual gearbox from G-Drag, ensuring that whomever drove this thing needed to know what they were doing. And unlike the original Volga, where corners were more of a polite suggestion than a requirement, this one featured BMW's active rear axle and high-performance brakes. To make the whole thing even more absurd, the entire steel body was hand-formed by 5 craftsmen over the course of an entire year. The only parts that remained from the original M21 were the headlights, turn signals, and taillights. Everything else was built from scratch. Inside, the Soviet-Bavarian mashup continued, gone with the Soviet-era plastics and utilitarian switchgear. Instead, A-Level transplanted the entire interior from the 850 CSI, including the dashboard, center console, and even the Recaro seats, all of which were reupholstered in premium leather. It was a Volga by appearance, but a BMW by heart. A car that looked like it belonged in a Soviet politician's garage, but could absolutely embarrass an E39 M5 in a drag race. Now, when the Volga V12 Coupe finally made its public debut, In 2001, at the Moscow International Automobile Salon, it was an instant sensation. The Russian press and public were completely floored. A classic Volga with a V12, a 6-speed manual. It was so ridiculous that it actually made sense. And according to A-Level, the owner who commissioned the project paid around $500,000 for the privilege. An eye-watering sum. But let's be honest, if you had the money, why not? Actually, I can think of a lot of things I'd rather buy with that amount of money, but it's not mine, so who am I to question? Anyways, even today, more than 2 decades later, the Volga V12 Coupe remains the most outrageous custom car to ever come out of Russia. In a world filled with modern Nissan skylines and wide-body Lamborghinis, this one-off Soviet Bavarian Chimera stands as a shining example of what happens when people stop asking whether they should and instead focus on whether they can. And to end it off, the Volga V12 Coupe isn't just a car, it's an automotive rebellion. It defies logic, spits in the face of tradition, and delivers one of the wildest custom builds ever conceived. It takes a car that was originally designed for bureaucrats and chauffeurs and transforms it into a 6-speed V12 powered Grand Tourer capable of humbling modern performance machines. And that is exactly why I believe that this thing deserves to be remembered. So hopefully this video can help do just that. But anyways, at the end of this video, please let me know what you guys thought of the video, what do you guys think of the car, and if you guys enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and if you guys did like it, you'll most like most of my other stuff. So just go through my channel, see if there's something else like, I'll check you guys in the next one. Cheers,